the continuation of our class on the foundational texts of Indian philosophy. The class will also be recorded and posted to YouTube afterwards. During the call, please keep yourself muted. After the call, there will be a Q&A session assisted by Bobby Coleman. At that time, please use the raising feature of Zoom to maintain a queue, and please stay on mute otherwise, unless it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Naman. I was asked to give a brief introduction to the class before Swami Tattwamayananda begins. And let me just add that it's an honor to help co-host this series of classes on the foundational texts of Indian philosophy for the Stanford Hindu Students Association. This series has been going on actually for decades and online in recent years to reach an even larger audience, not only during the pandemic, but continuing thereafter. And we're very grateful that we have the ability to do that. So thank you again. Now, we've reached a point of starting a new series, and it's really a great honor to make an introduction of this sort, because this is such a towering world classic, the Mahabharata. And it's timeless for a reason. There are great, profound insights in it, timeless wisdom, and its applicability is not just that of a dusty old tome, but that of a living, breathing work of great philosophical and spiritual insight that's relevant for today. And I'm pretty certain that in each and every class session, that relevance will be obvious and brought to light by the Swami's extrapolations and commentary on the text. The idea that we're able to do this with such a master instructor who is completely authentic and well-versed in the original Sanskrit language and the entire body of commentaries throughout time is a great blessing for us. The goal of the class, I'm pausing to mute the mics. The way this will work is that the mics will be off so that we don't have this audio bleed through, and then the mics will be turned back on as people ask their question and answer. So I'm muting as people join for that reason. The goal of the class, I think, will be to bring out the value of the text in terms of its ability to illuminate the questions of how to live with good values, how to have a philosophy of life that produces inner harmony and ethical living. So those of us who are great appreciators of the Bhagavad Gita will now turn to the parent text, the great work of the Mahabharata. So without any further elaborations, I'm very eager to turn it over to Swami Tattwamayananda ji for the class. Thank you.
Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Thank you, Bobby, for that wonderful introduction. And we are now starting this new series. So Bobby was talking about the parent text. It's a very apt word, because Mahabharata is the parent text of the most important representative work of Hindu tradition called Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is only around 700 verses divided into 18 chapters. Mahabharata in its standard edition is almost like 100,000 verses. And it's one of the grandest creations of human imagination, an epic of staggering size, depth and complexity. And if you look at the number of characters, episodes, debates and discussions. It is absolutely staggering. Now, to begin with, I would say the most compelling theme of the entire text is Dharma. Dharma is a very complex word. In actual practice, it is very simple, but it's very difficult to understand. And if you compare these two great epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, I'm just trying to compare Mahabharata with Ramayana, but that's the only work that could be compared, Ramayana is around 24,000 verses. In size, it is very, very small compared to Mahabharata. But it is supposed to be the older of the two great epics. Ramayana story is supposed to be much older, and in many ways it is more of a family story than Mahabharata. The central theme of Ramayana and Mahabharata, both epics, is Dharma. In Ramayana, the main character, Rama, is called the physical embodiment of Dharma. Ramo Vigrahavan Dharma Sadhu Satya Parakramaha. It's very important to understand something about Ramayana before entering Mahabharata, because there is a close link, a connection, and in many ways there is some relationship here also. So Rama is the embodiment of Dharma. And this definition doesn't come from a saint. It comes from one of the demon characters of Ramayana, Maricha, who was an uncle of Ravana, the main villain of Ramayana story. The most important character of Mahabharata is the same spiritual person who was supposed to have incarnated later. So Rama and Krishna, both are supposed to be the incarnations, the manifestations of the same spiritual person called Vishnu. There are interesting comparisons, Rama stood for truth. He stood for all conceivable human values, but he was very rigid in his practice of Dharma. You often find Rama doing things that we may not be able to agree with in modern times. Krishna, on the other hand, was also an embodiment, a practitioner of the same Dharma ideal, but in a much more practical manner. Krishna defines Dharma in a much more practical way. When I said, the famous verse is there in the Mahabharata, Purvai Anugato Bhavo Devai Asuraghadibihi Sadbhischa Anugata Pantha Sarvaihi Anugammide. The definition of Dharma in Mahabharata, what it says is, Krishna is trying to give an explanation of Dharma in his most practical manner. He says, this ancient value system, Dharma, was practiced by ancient sages and ancient warriors and ancient gods and goddesses. Now, they practiced in such a manner that the main purpose of the Dharma was to preserve society, to protect society, and not to practice a rigid idealism. This is very important to remember. The rigid idealism, you know what it means actually, rigid idealism. In Ramayana, Rama renounces, gives up his own wife. Apparently, his plan was to stick to truth, but you don't accept. You cannot really support Rama for giving up Sita even after the Ramayana battle in Lanka, or the way he treated some of his own people just to protect the exalted ideal of Dharma. So Rama was rigid and literary in his interpretation of Dharma. Krishna, on the other hand, you find doing things which Rama could not even thought of. You know, when Krishna found that there were some evil characters in Rama, in Mahabharata, and they were on the verge of being victorious. And if they had become victorious, then it would have led to the liquidation, the wiping out the entire Pandava army. To give the example, Mahabharata contains one of the most heinous scenes in world literature. That is the humiliation of a humble woman, Draupadi, in the Mahabharata court, which is totally a horrible scene. In the entire world literature, you don't find anything like that. In the Mahabharata, in the Kaurava court, when the wife of the Pandavas, she was humiliated in such a horrible manner. I don't want to give a description of that. And at that time, the Pandavas kept quiet, and many of the other elders in the Kaurava family kept quiet. At that time, Krishna alone came to the rescue of Draupadi. And then you can find in the name of Dharma, interpreted in a very literary, in a very rigid manner, even the Yudhishthira, the great character, the elder brother of all the four Pandavas, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, he kept quiet in the name of Dharma. And then what happens, that lady was humiliated in the Kaurava court. That actually led to the big war in which a large percentage of the population of those times were completely wiped out. So you can imagine, one man practiced non-violence. And who was he? Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira was primarily responsible for the inaction on the part of our Pandavas. They did not attempt to stop the humiliation. As a result of this, there was a big war in which a huge percentage of the population practically wiped out. So one man practically practiced non-violence that led to so much of violence, so much of bloodshed, almost wiping out the entire population of those times. On the other hand, you can find the Ramayana. Rama also practiced Dharma in a very literal, he interpreted Dharma in a very idealistic manner. He had to honor the promise given by his own father at some point of time in the past, and for that he had to he gave up the kingdom, and which led to the kidnapping of his own wife, which actually led to the war, and eventually there was a huge bloodshed. So, but then Krishna says, as I mentioned earlier at the end, in one point Krishna says, if Dharma is interpreted as physical non-violence, and if that interpretation leads to greater violence, as it happened in the context of Mahabharata. As I mentioned earlier, the practice of non-violence, the practice of interpretation of Dharma as non-violence, on the part of the Yudhishthira and other elders in the Kaurava court, that was the cause of the war and bloodshed later. But actually, because they tried to avoid doing violence to defend a humble woman in Kaurava court, that led to much greater violence. So frequently you can see this happening. When we try to avoid a problem, when we try to avoid an unpleasant responsibility, when we try to run away from an unpleasant duty, actually it leads to much worse consequences. In the Second World War in 1938, I frequently compare this, in the Second World War, there was this called the Treaty of Appeasement. Many of you must be aware of this. 1938, Hitler had already become the most powerful man in Europe, and he was a warmonger. And it was to appease Hitler, the British Prime Minister, David Chamberlain, the French Prime Minister, then the Italian leader, Mussolini, and Hitler. They all met in Munich and they came to an agreement. They won't interfere if Hitler attacked Czechoslovakia, trying to annex certain land because of Germanic-speaking population. And Hitler was in a way given permission to, indirectly, permission to attack and annex certain land in Czechoslovakia. And Hitler felt encouraged, in fact he felt free to attack Czechoslovakia, and eventually instead of stopping war with the annexation of one small territory, he expanded his hostile activities, entered Czechoslovakia, then Poland was attacked, and that was how the Second World War began. Why? Because they tried to avoid practicing violence, thinking that by not doing duty, by running away from an unpleasant responsibility of facing Hitler, standing up to Hitler, both Britain and France were indirectly responsible in that way by allowing Hitler to begin the Second World War. So we can imagine the same thing happening in Mahabharata. Bhishma kept quiet, and then Karna kept quiet, Drona kept quiet, and Yudhishthira even kept quiet when a humble woman was humiliated in the Kaurava court, and they did not react. What happened was that led to eventually the big bloodshed. So you can imagine the importance of, how the importance of doing duty is very often overlooked by some characters, and they led to much greater violence. There is a well-known verse in the Mahabharata, it comes in Bhishma Parva, that actually underlines this important point. I'm just giving a bird view of some of the complexities of these two texts, and then I will come to Mahabharata straight. There is a well-known verse in the Mahabharata, Bhishma Parva. Majje trayi dandanito khatayam sarve dharma prachayehu vibuddhaha. What it means is, so trayi means here Veda, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Atharvaveda. I mean the three Vedas, which indirectly means all concepts of duties, responsibilities, justice, and so on. Majjed, it will be drowned. When a king, when a king fails to do his duty, Majjed trayi dandanito khatayam. Dandaniti actually means the idea or the concept of justice, sometimes, sama, dana, bheda, danda, etc. So when justice fails, what happens is all the three Vedas, which indirectly means all concepts of dharma, all concepts of duties and responsibilities, justice and five-plane society, that also will be drowned when dandaniti, when stagecraft fails. The sarve dharma prakshayuhu vibuddhaha. All dharmas, all concepts of dharma, righteousness will collapse. Sarve dharma shasramanam katasyuhu kshatre tyakte rajadharme purane. So when rajadharma fails, it means proper justice and proper stagecraft of our rule, it's a political stagecraft. When they collapse, then all dharmas, all ways of life also will collapse. Because sarve tyaga rajadharmeshu drishtaha, sarva diksha rajadharmeshu cha uktaha, sarva vidya rajadharmeshu yuktaha, sarve loka rajadharme pravishtaha. Rajadharma is very important. Rajadharma here doesn't simply mean politics. It means stagecraft. It means sense of justice. It means doing what is necessary to make sure that justice prevails in society. So you can find in the Mahabharata. Mahabharata indirectly refers to large number of great lawgivers of ancient world in India. Manu, Yajnavalkya, Vyasa, Bhishma, Kaudilya. Of course, he came later. Arthashastra was written much later. But many of the great teachings in Kaudilya's Arthashastra can be found expressed in different ways in Mahabharata, Bhoja, Narada, Vidura, Vasishtha, and of course Sri Krishna. So the greatness of Mahabharata is that it has so many conflicts, so many inner conflicts, so many situations where people feel their helplessness because the statecraft fails, the administrative system fails. But then Vyasa, in one context, makes a very famous statement in the Mahabharata. The statement is very, very famous. What it says is, Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. 4 values. Dharma is the underlying principle. The regulating principle is Dharma. Artha and Kama represent our desire for enjoy this world and our efforts for acquiring means to enjoy this world. So Dharma is the regulating principle. Artha are the means for enjoying this world, different objects of enjoyment in this world. Kama represents desires. So our efforts to acquire means for enjoying this world should not deviate from the path of Dharma. If you stick to Dharma, which also means if we stick to Dharma in its most comprehensive sense, that means one should be willing to do duty no matter how unpleasant it is. Then what happens is Dharma, Artha, Moksha, all other values will follow. Urdhubahur viramesha nahi kasyik sunopi me dharma arthascha kamascha sadharma kimna sevyate. There are different Padhavedas are here. So Vyasa is said to have made this statement in utter despair. In one context at the end of Mahabharata. See, if humanity sticks to the principles of Dharma, then they will automatically be able to enjoy Artha, Kama and Moksha. But unfortunately, people do not follow Dharma, either due to viciousness and wickedness. In the Ramayana, you can find characters like Duryodhana, Dushasana and so on. In the in the Ramayana, sorry, there is a confusion. In the Ramayana, you find characters like Ravana and other demons. In the Mahabharata, you find characters like Duryodhana, Dushasana and so on. So many of these characters, they deviate from the path of Dharma in their attempt to enjoy the fruits of their labor, the fruits of this world. So what happens is they lose Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. This is a very important principle that is underlined again and again in both these epics. In the Ramayana, you can find characters like Ravana who do all sorts of terrible things. And they did all that to enjoy this world for Artha and Kama. So they deviated from the path of Dharma. As a result, they lost Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha in the Ramayana. In the Mahabharata, characters like Dushasana, Duryodhana and so on, they also deviated from the path of Dharma. As a result, they lost both. But then there is another problem that Mahabharata reveals, that is the tendency to deviate from the path of Dharma on the part of good people. They are not themselves practitioners of Adharma. See, there is a character like Bhishma. One of the most sublime characters of Mahabharata is Bhishma. He is the grandsire, he is the great ancestor. And the Drona was a great teacher of the martial arts who taught all the Kshatriyas, both Kauravas and Pandavas were taught their duties and responsibilities, the fighting techniques by Drona. And Karna, another character. He was himself a great man in some ways. He was a great idealist. But then they always were reluctant to do something which they consider to be unpleasant. And they ran away from their duties and responsibilities. As a result, they lost Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. That's why Krishna says Dharma should be a sustaining, a preserving ideal. It is not a one-sided ideal. It has a situational, it's a practical dimension. That's why Krishna says, Purvaihi anugato bhavo devehi asuraghadibhihi. Sadbhischa anugata pantha sarvai anugamyate. So very often, the popular interpretation of Dharma, for example, Dhari Dedi Dharma. So, Dharma is something that preserves. That doesn't give full picture. But Krishna says, Dharma when practiced, it should preserve certain values, certain concepts, certain ideas. It should also sustain society. So these are the two important aspects of Ramayana and Mahabharata. I shall try to give a few more flashes from both the scriptures, and then I shall come to the subject again. There are great statements in the Mahabharata. Dharma eva hado hanti, dharmo rakshadi rakshitaha, tasma dharmam na tyajami, manu dharmo hado avadhit. There is again, it comes in the Aranyaka Parva, it says, and Shasana Parva, it comes, Dharma eva hado hanti, dharma rakshadi rakshitaha. If you deviate from Dharma, the Dharma from which you deviate itself will destroy you. Dharmo rakshadi rakshitaha. On the other hand, if you practice Dharma, that Dharma when properly practiced will protect you. Tasma dharmam na tyajami. Therefore, we should not give up Dharma. Dharma should be preserved at all state. So you can find many such statements in the Ramayana and Mahabharata. I shall make a few more important observations before entering Mahabharata straight. Frequently, while talking about Mahabharata, I will be speaking about Ramayana also. There is a very well-known statement that comes in the Mahabharata, where Duryodhana makes a statement which is frequently quoted. It's not found in the Mahabharata standardized versions, but it is found in some of the local versions, See, I know Dharma, but I am not able to practice it. I know Adharma, but I am not able to resist the temptation to practice. Janami dharmam nachame pravritti, janami adharmam nachame nivritti. So, Duryodhana says, I know Dharma, but I am not able to practice it because my samskaras do not permit me to practice it. So you can find in the Mahabharata this helplessness. Sometimes there are people who want to do great things, who want to practice great things, but they are not able to bring their own mind to practice it because they are not able to, their mind will not permit them to do that. They are fighting against their own inner forces, their own tendencies. So, such situations you find in Mahabharata. On the other hand, there are also sublime scenes in Ramayana, the other epic, where you can find Rama shows great compassion, great understanding, even while dealing with his enemies. I shall come to that, see in the Ramayana, for example. In many ways, it can be compared with Homer's Iliad. In Homer's Iliad, you find Hector, the Trojan prince, he was the villain and he kidnapped Helen, the Greek princess. This is how the story goes. And then Achilles killed Hector. This is how the story goes. But there is a great contrast, which in a way shows the sublime interpretation, the sublime nature of Dharma is practiced, maybe in the days of Ramayana and Mahabharata. In the Iliad, you find Achilles killed Hector. Hector killed Patroclus, Achilles' friend, and then Achilles took revenge. He killed Hector, the Trojan prince, and then he tied Hector's dead body to the tail of horses. He tied to the chariot and then went round the battlefield 3 times in the presence of the wives and children of Hector. And he dishonored the dead body of his fallen enemy whom he had killed. This is how the story goes in Iliad. In Ramayana, there is an interesting scene. You can see the difference between Rama on the one hand, Rama of Ramayana, and Achilles of Iliad, Homer's Iliad. You can find the beginning of Valmiki Ramayana, which is the original book. The story begins like this. Once, when Valmiki was sitting after his evening ablutions, Narada came there, and when we found Narada, the great sage, had arrived, then Valmiki put a question to Narada. Kornasmin sampratam loge gunavan kashavirivan dharmajnasya kritajnasya satyavakyo dridavrata. Like that, Valmiki put this question to Narada, the great philosopher of that time. He is a great saint. Who is the most wonderful human being living in this world today? Who has all conceivable human qualities? This is a question that was put to Narada by Valmiki. So, in answer to this question, Narada says, Ikshvaku Vamsaprabhavo Ramo Nama Prakirtidaka. So, that great man, the embodiment of all conceivable human qualities, is Rama. He is born in the dynasty of Ikshvaku. So, Rama is called, the embodiment of Dharma, Ramo Vigrahavan Dharma, Sadhu Satya Parakramaha. This certificate, as I mentioned earlier, it came not from one devotee of Rama, but from a demon who was an enemy of Rama. How that Rama reacted, how he responded, how he treated a fallen enemy. At the end of the war in Lanka, Ravana was killed. Ravana was the evil person, the villain of Ramayana. Vibhishana was his younger brother, who had deserted his elder brother. He was disgusted with the evil activities of Ravana. So Yudhishthira refused. He was a bit reluctant to do the after-death ceremony of his elder brother. Because he was an evil person, he kidnapped Sita. He is the great villain of Ramayana epic. So Vibhishana thought, well, I won't do his after-death ceremony. Then Rama says, he is addressing Vibhishana. He says, Maranantani vairani nirvrittam na prayojanam. Kriyadam asya samskaru mama pesha yathatava. It comes in the critical edition, it comes in the 6th chapter, Sarga of Ramayana. Rama says, all hostilities come to an end with death. We are not fighting with Ravana, the evil man. We are fighting the evil that Ravana represented. We are not fighting against a human being, against a living being. We are fighting the evil tendencies that represented, that were found in Ravana's character. So all hostilities come to an end. Nirvrittanam prayojanam. Our purpose was to destroy the evil for the preservation of humanity. Therefore, you should perform the after-death ceremony of Ravana. Because if you don't do that, I will do. That was the implication. He is as much my brother as yours. And Vibhishana had to perform the after-death ceremony. So you can find sublime scenes in Ramayana, which shows the great contrast between this ancient culture that preserved in ancient India. Just compare that with Iliad, you can see. There is, of course, some similarity, but we can see the exalted nature of the of a civilization that was cultivated by the idea of dharma. So today I'm not going much further. After this I will open for Q&A. You are most welcome to ask questions. To begin with, today we are discussing we will have a longer discussion Q&A with regard to the two epics, and I am bringing Ramayana because it's very important to understand the greatness of Mahabharata. You should compare it with the Ramayana. To understand the greatness of Ramayana, we should compare it with Mahabharata. These are two great classics that represent the philosophy of values, how people lived, how they resolved their inner conflicts, how they responded to different situations, how they even solved their problems. All examples you find in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So you can have an interaction now. You are most welcome to begin questions. Bobby, today I want to spend more time for interaction.
Excellent. Thank you, Maharaj. Sri Ram's hand is
Yeah.
up first.
Yeah.
Sri Ram, please unmute yourself, and for the rest, one moment, please.
Yeah, yeah.
The rest of you, you can help the sequence of questions by using this raise hand feature, which is often available on the controls listed react or reaction. If you go there, you'll see a raise hand feature, and feel free to use that, and then I'll be able to see you and call you in sequence. Also, those of you who might be streaming on YouTube Live, not later when it's on demand, but when it's live, there's a live chat, and I'll look for questions there as well. All right, thank you, Sri Ram. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Swami. Thank you for initiating this wonderful series on Dharma.
Could you
Swami,
Could you?
thank you for initiating this series on the Mahabharata and Dharma, Swami.
Mahabharata and?
Dharma.
No, Dharma is the central theme of both these epics. That equally, yeah.
You gave a definition of Dharma is Dharyate Dharma.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I will explain. Thank you.
I just want to make a comment or observation that it is similar to the English phrase, virtue is its own reward.
Similar to?
English saying, virtue is its own reward.
Yeah, it can be marginally considered to be a definition, but dharma, I shall try to explain this, So the Sanskrit root is dhr, dharyate, that holds, supports, sustains, protects and preserves. That's a literal translation of the root dhr dhatu. So how does dharma support society, civilization, our own individual life? When we stick to certain principles in our life, it takes care of a lot of our problems and inner conflicts. Again, it goes far beyond the simple definition that you find in the Mahabharata, ahimsa paramo dharma. That's a very popular interpretation in Mahabharata. Thank you. In fact, I wanted to have a longer discussion at the first session. Ahimsa paramo dharma. Ahimsa is the most supreme form of dharma. This also in Mahabharata. But is ahimsa literally interpreted the supreme dharma? In fact, Neville Chamberlain was practicing ahimsa. What happened? It led to so much of himsa. Yudhishthira was practicing ahimsa even when that most humiliating scene took place in the Kauravas court. So, ahimsa ahimsa literally interpreted the absence of physical violence, not doing anything that may involve any kind of physical activity that could be interpreted as violence. That is not dharma. Dharma is something that preserves and protects. And for preserving dharma, sometimes violence also may be needed to avoid greater violence from happening. So, Second World War, I give the example of Second World War. See, I gave, as a student of European history, when I compare this Mahabharata, I cannot see a better example from world history. Second World War did happen because Navy Chamberlain and French minister, they refused. They were not willing to stand up to Hitler's evil intentions. That's how Hitler felt emboldened to begin his war. So there was certainly ahimsa on the part of the British Prime Minister, the allied politicians. But then that led to greater violence. It doesn't support. Dharma should be something that supports society, that preserves, that protects society. So the actual implication of Dharma goes far beyond non-violence interpreted in physical terms. It's very important. Krishna was not reluctant to use physical force to destroy evil forces, because if Krishna had not punished them, they would have destroyed the world. That's how Mahabharata story unfolds in course of time. You're going to find out that Krishna used what we now call tactics and strategy to destroy evil forces, which are the only reason why society was preserved. Some people remained alive after the Mahabharata war, because thanks to Krishna's wisdom. So, Dharma in its literal implication means something that preserves, protects, sustains, which involve doing things when that is necessary for the preservation of society. So, you should contrast this definition with the other definition in the Mahabharata, ahimsa paramo dharma. So, that's a very important point. So, I think it's clear to you.
You cited Ramayana.
Can you be a little slow in your conversation? That will be very helpful. Can you?
You cited that in the Ramayana, Rama is called Vigrahavan of Dharma.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira is called Dharmaraja. Can you comment on him?
Yeah, I tell you, Yudhishthira, in the Mahabharata there are scenes where Yudhishthira was questioned by his own mother Kunti for becoming an imbecile, for becoming timid on the face of serious challenges. And there are scenes, I'm going to discuss that, where Bhima challenged his own elder brother. And then that's why the most magnificent discourse on the subject of Dharma happens in Shanti Parva and also Bhishma Parva, where Bhishma, who himself admits that he did make mistakes because of his dependency on the evil king Duryodhana. He had to support Duryodhana and all his evil activities indirectly. Though it was within his power to correct him, he did not do that. Bhishma admits that. So, Yudhishthira is not the ideal character of Mahabharata. Krishna is the ideal character of Mahabharata, not Yudhishthira. You follow? He is called Daddy. He is the son of Dharmaraja. That is a mythological story. But the real character in Mahabharata, he was a great man. He did certainly display many great qualities of Dharma. But then, in many ways, he was a failed example of Mahabharata. Yudhishthira was a failed example. If there was no Krishna to support him, the war would have ended in favor of the Kauravas, who did most terrible, obscene crimes against humanity in the Kaurava court. You have to read Mahabharata properly. Understand? That's why Vivekananda in modern times says, Krishna, he is praising Krishna. Krishna had no cobwebs in his brain. That is, no cobwebs. Cobweb means doubts and confusions and perplexities, doing things which you should not do, and not doing things that you should do. That sort of confusion Krishna never had. That's why the ultimate explanation of Dharma is given by Krishna. Purvai anigato margo devehi asuraghadibhihi. This ancient path of Dharma is practiced by our sages, which actually helped us to preserve our civilization. So Yudhishthira is not the most ideal character of Mahabharata. Krishna is the most ideal character of Mahabharata. Krishna was kind and compassionate while dealing with humble people, helpless people who are in need of protection. He gave them protection. And also, he was not so kind and compassionate while dealing with monsters, cruel men. Remember? Because when you are compassionate towards a villain, you are indirectly becoming a friend of the evil. Remember? As human beings, every person has to follow certain principles. We should not assume that we are going to control the entire universe. So Krishna says, in individual life, in Rajadharma, he mentioned Rajadharma, he says, whenever there is a degradation of the Rajadharma, statecraft, all other dharmas will collapse. So in fact, Mahabharata is a wonderful book that discusses statecraft, diplomacy, dharma in different situations, life situations. A king, how he should practice dharma, etc. Okay? Is that clear to you?
Swamiji. Yes, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Charles to wait just a moment because thematically there's a question on the YouTube live chat that's tied to what this discussion is. Can Maharaj elucidate the famed Yaksha Prashna in the Mahabharata in light of Yudhishthira's slips from Dharma?
Yaksha Prashna, in Yaksha Prashna, you can see the sublime wisdom of Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira, as a great wise man, a great philosopher, he answers all the questions and he fully succeeds. He gets 100% mark in his Yaksha Prashna. Yaksha Prashna is a very interesting scene where a celestial being called Yaksha suddenly comes and he is testing Yudhishthira's wisdom. In those contexts, you can see Yudhishthira in his most sublime stature. But that Yudhishthira, who was such a wise man, while discussing higher subjects with a celestial being, was not able to successfully confront a life-threatening critical situation in his own family life, in his own life situations. Yudhishthira failed miserably. In fact, his own mother, Kunti herself, had to scold him for being timid and for being slow to respond to situations which were necessary, which was his duty to respond properly. So that's why Yudhishthira, in some ways, Yudhishthira was a very wise man, he was a great philosopher. Yaksha Prashna underlines this important character of Yudhishthira. That is true. But at the same time, the same Yudhishthira failed miserably. I shall give you an example of this. Yudhishthira and the Pandavas were, they were living in forest. At that time a great sage called Maitreya. So Maitreya says, whenever somebody is doing an injustice against you and your own people, and when it's your duty to defend and protect them, and then you try to interpret your own inaction in the name of higher principles, and you run away from your own duty, you avoid doing what you are supposed to do, that doesn't become dharma. Maitreya corrects Yudhishthira. So there are many, many interesting situations in Mahabharata. That's why, again, you have to come back to Krishna. Krishna was the very embodiment of compassion, kindness, and humility while dealing with Draupadi, the helpless woman character in Mahabharata, Kunti, the mother of Pandavas, and there are many others like that. In Mahabharata also there is another character. I can give you the example. Gandhari. Gandhari was the mother of the Kauravas. Gandhari, her greatness can be seen from this context. When Kauravas went to her for her blessings in the warfare, Gandhari doesn't say, you will become victorious, because she was a great woman, a great character and great chastity. Her blessings would have a great effect. He didn't say, she didn't say that, Yado dharmas tado jaya. You know what Gandhari says? Wherever there is dharma, there will be victory, there will be prosperity. So she knew that her own son, Duryodhana, was an evil character, was a terrible villain. She was not willing to bless him with victory, remember. And she almost went mad with grief at the end of the Mahabharata battle because her children were killed. But still, that lady did not bless her own son, Duryodhana, saying that you will be victorious. No, she didn't say that. What she said, Yado dharma stado jaya. Wherever there is dharma, there will be victory. So you can imagine the greatness of that character, Gandhari. So she knew that they are all her own children. Out of 100 children, only one Vikarna dared to question the evil activities of Dushasana and Duryodhana in the Kaurava court. Others all supported. So Gandhari says, wherever there is dharma, there will be victory. She did not openly bless her own evil son with victory. That shows her greatness. What does it say? So that's a very important point, remember.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Thank you. Charles Feldman, thank you for standing by. Thank you.
Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah.
Your talk on Dharma makes me think of an issue in my personal life,
Yeah.
which has to do with food. And I know Thakur ate fish, and Swamiji ate whatever people around him were eating. What is the right thing to do when it comes to Dharma? Should we be vegetarian, or what's the right thing to do?
Yeah. I would say vegetarian food is certainly helpful for developing spiritual qualities. But again, I want to add that vegetarianism doesn't ensure spirituality. But I'm a vegetarian because that's the culture I'm born into. I can't stand anything like egg or fish or meat. But I don't say that because I'm vegetarian, I'm spiritually better than others. I can't say that. So often Christ was a non-vegetarian. Buddha was a non-vegetarian. He died of eating pork. Do you think Buddha was a great spiritual person? Hitler became a vegetarian to the end of his lifetime, they say. Was he a great spiritual person? So it doesn't define spirituality. But in individual life, what you said is correct, that being a vegetarian will be certainly helpful for controlling our emotions and feelings and lower biological drives. Vegetarianism is certainly helpful for a beginner in spiritual life. But we should not get away with the impression that being vegetarian alone defines spirituality. That will be a very lopsided interpretation.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah. Thank you.
While waiting more questions, I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
And Maharaj, in literature of all times,
Yeah.
all the stories that have import
Yeah.
raise the stakes. The stakes are always very high. The conflicts are very extreme, and the necessity of action is always dire.
Yeah.
Especially in what we would regard as an epic. In modern times, so-called genre fiction, mysteries and space stories and Wild West stories, especially the Wild West stories, always have these strong ethical imperatives.
Yeah.
There's a lawless town that doesn't have a marshal or a sheriff, and there's a need for some order to emerge. And it just strikes me as a very universal matter that some order is sought in the vacuum, you know, that if there's going to be all of that chaos, that some positive actor, some positive force needs to come into play in order to preserve and protect the conduct of the village. And it's not necessarily somebody who's aggressive. It's not necessarily somebody who is eager to use that authority. In the Western stories, it's often a reluctant hero who is very judicious about wanting to keep the peace as non-violently as possible. Do you think that these modern stories are just part of the universal topics that the hero with 1,000 faces, so to speak? Joseph Campbell had that theory about these myths emerging from some deep consciousness. Or do you think that maybe it starts with epics like the Mahabharata that inspire the treatments that we see today?
Yeah, that's true. Mahabharata puts us in certain situations where we will be forced to will be compelled to question some of our conventional understandings and definitions of ethics and morality. For example, morality and ethics and spirituality means inaction, even in the face of an absolute responsibility or necessity to do things. If we just avoid doing that itself constitutes an amount to spirituality, then we are morally, spiritually in a superior position. There is an element of hypocrisy in that, I tell you. And to drive home this idea, again I am quoting a verse that a part of that I quoted just now. Duryodhana is, the evil villain of Mahabharata. He does every conceivable terrible things he does. If he didn't do, or he compelled his own brothers, Dushasana, to do terrible things in the Kauravas court. It is, I tell you again, I want to repeat, this scene in the Mahabharata is apparently the most heinous, the most horrible or horrifying scene found in any world literature, where a helpless woman, a wife, Draupadi, is being humiliated in the court in the presence of his own husband, Yudhishthira, and this man keeps quiet, doing nothing, and all in the principles of Dharma, justifying Dharma. Also, the elders who could have single-handedly stopped this crime, they kept quiet. Again, they were swearing, they were talking about higher Dharma. So this Duryodhana makes a statement, Janami dharmam nachame pravritti, Janami adharmam nachame nivritti, yatha rishikesha hridisthidena, yatha niyuktosmi tatha karomi. It means what he says is, again I want to tell you, this is not found in the standard editions of Mahabharata. But it is frequently quoted in many of the local versions of Mahabharata. This one. But there should be some reason why this verse was preserved in human memory, in the legends for thousands of years. So I tell you, Duryodhana is the evil man. He says, I know Dharma, but I cannot practice it. I know Adharma, the opposite of that, but I cannot resist the temptation to practice Adharma. Then he says, that is much more terrible, hypocritical. Yatha rishikesha hridisthitena. Oh God, you are also sitting in my heart and making me do terrible things. So I am helpless. Now remember, so the last line is Yatha niyiktosmi tatha karomi Yatha rishikesha hridistidena. Oh Lord, you are sitting in my heart. And just as you are directing me, so I do. So he gives entire responsibility for all these criminal things to Krishna. Krishna is the all-pervading divine principle in the higher interpretation. God, you are sitting in my heart. I want to do dharma, but I cannot do that. I am helpless. I want to avoid doing adharma, but I cannot resist the temptation to practice adharma. And you are sitting in my heart, making me do all things. So you can imagine, this is a common problem with humanity. So you said that, the Wild West stories. So you find many people sometimes show a tendency to take refuge under the garb of spirituality and morality and ethics, either to hide their hypocrisy or as an attempt to hide their timidity or their unwillingness to take risk. That's why Krishna says, again and again Krishna says, by running away from an unpleasant duty, you cannot escape from your responsibility. The responsibility will chase you. Akirtim chabi bhudani khadaishyanditi avyam sambhavidasya chakirtihi marana dinichide. He tells Arjuna in the Gita, Akirtim chabi bhudani. So if you run away from your duty, people start telling you that you are a worthless man. Your reputation will be lost. So like that, people do have a tendency to avoid taking a responsibility and taking a duty which is slightly unpleasant, which is very difficult to practice. And then instead of saying that openly, they will say, well, I would rather not do that because it's not proper for me to do that. So in this context, you can find suddenly a good man, good-natured man suddenly emerges, and there is no sheriff, there is no law in the mid-19th century American society. In the Wild West story, suddenly a strong fellow who is ruthless, grim-looking, and is talking in a very, very rough language, and he comes and does some good things. So I think that very imagination of the writer who conceives such a character, he wants somebody to come and put in a state of law and harmony, some degree of social harmony, so that there will be peace in society. The creative writer, the novelist who could conceive or who could create such a fictional character, he could do that because he is thinking in terms of the dire need to have somebody who will do something good for society.
Thank you, Maharaj. That's clear. There are raised hands.
Yeah.
I see 3 of them. Another question on the chat and a question on the YouTube live chat as well. So let's take Chitra first. First hand first.
Yeah.
Namaste, Swamiji.
Okay.
Thank you for doing this lecture. I just have a question that when I was younger, now I'm past 60, when I was younger, I used to be subject to a lot of anger. I had anger issues, and because of that, I have not acted in a manner that was consistent with Dharma. Now I realize the error of my ways, but because of that, I've hurt a lot of people, their feelings, and also caused a lot of anguish to other people. So now I am tormented by regret. My whole days are filled with regret for what I was in the past. So I would like to know how I can find peace.
Oh yeah, you can of course Gita itself, Gita is part of Mahabharata. Bhagavad Gita says there's a quick mechanism to escape the inner torments, the feeling, the memories, the samskaras that again and again come haunting you, disturbing you. I did something wrong which I should not have done. So I will say, Sarvadharman parityaja mamekam saranam prajahamto sarvabhabebhyo mokshaishyami masaja. It comes in the Mahabharata, in the Gita, 18th chapter, 66th verse. The Lord Krishna says, well, if you feel totally helpless, if you feel at the end of your own resources, you did your best, you couldn't succeed, you did not succeed, well, when such a situation arises, what do? You surrender yourself to the Lord, to God. That will help you, on the one hand, to be a better human being, to restrain our senses and a tendency to become angry or like that. We can, some kind of self-restraint we can practice. And also, more importantly, from a psychological perspective, to face these unpleasant memories, disturbing memories of past mistakes. When you feel I should not have done it, I should have done it differently. These memories frequently, drag human mind to very, very difficult situations. To avoid that, there is only way, close the bargain and surrender to God's will. When this becomes a sincere self-surrender, it brings in a lot of tranquility and peace.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chitra. I'm going to select owner now because there was a question that I saw earlier in the meeting chat, and now I see that you're ready to ask it with your hand raised. So if you can unmute yourself, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Pranam Maharaj ji.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah, please.
So Maharaj, I think you clearly explained the greatness of Krishna in the Mahabharata and his acts, especially with regards to adharmic characters in the Mahabharata. For example, he lectures Karna at the very end when Karna is dying. He said, "You didn't act properly in the sabha with Draupadi."
Yeah.
But then Bhishma was also there.
Yeah.
But Krishna seems partial to Bhishma instead of Karna, because Bhishma also, despite his greatness, when Draupadi was being assaulted, Bhishma did not act. So why is Krishna partial to one character against the other character? And then also when you look at the bigger picture, Krishna and Arjun go and destroys the Khandava forest. So Krishna, is he allowed to be libertarian with his acts because he's God? Because he seems to be a little bit adharmic also in some cases.
Yeah. Okay, so on the one hand, there's a clear reason why he was a bit unpleasant towards Karna. Karna's response, his reaction when that Panchali humiliation took place in Kauravas court was different from that of Bhishma. Bhishma's only mistake was that he kept quiet. He did not encourage. But Karna did, at some point, he did even encourage Dushasana, who was responsible for a terrible thing. So Karna was, Bhishma on the other hand, was basically a wise man. Bhishma's character is a metaphor and a warning to modern human civilization, Bhishma was the embodiment of all conceivable, imaginable good qualities that you can think of. But at the same time, he himself admits that his dependence on Duryodhana, the evil prince, and Dhritarashtra, who was his helpless father, that he was eating the food offered, he was enjoying the comforts offered by this evil king, that made him dependent, maybe against his own will, a feeling of dependency on an evil person that polluted, that defiled his own sense of justice and fair play. So that prevented him from doing something he should have done, from doing his duty in Kauravas court. And of Bhishma's greatness is that he actually admits that even he was lying in the bed of arrows. That is something. Bhishma was a great philosopher. He was a wise man. So many of the greatest teachings in the Mahabharata come from Bhishma. Krishna and then Bhishma, two great characters. Bhishma Parva is very extensive, Shanti Parva and so on. So, Karna on the other hand, he was a great warrior, he had certain many qualities, very man of charity. But there was something in him that made him blind in his hatred for Arjuna. Not for other Pandavas, Arjuna. So that, I think that may be the reason why Krishna was less happy with Karna than with Bhishma. It's a very important point, remember,
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you. And you say, another thing I want to add about, you said Krishna. See, you find, well, there are many interesting things in world history. To give an example, in Indian history, when Muhammad, I think the first invasion, Battle of Terrain is called, Prithviraj Chauhan defeated the invader. I think Muhammad Gori, Muhammad Ghazni, somebody. And then he was imprisoned and he was let off. And he came back and destroyed. He came back and attacked at night and destroyed. That's how the Sultanate began in Delhi. So very often, find acts of charity to evil people will always have most unpleasant consequences. That is recorded in history. Maybe that's the reason why Vivekananda said there was no cobweb in Krishna's brain. Krishna never doubted. So this man who was so compassionate, so helpful in protecting Draupadi and the Kundi, even compassionate while dealing with Gandhari, who blamed him for the great war and so on, that Krishna, actually he never hesitated to take strong action against evil men, because he knew that any feeling of charity towards evil people will have very unpleasant consequences. As you can see, again you have to remind yourself of this appeasement, the Treaty of Appeasement. It's called the Treaty of Munich, 1938. So if you can ever, people don't remember those things. Hitler was permitted to attack certain land, which is a small part in Czechoslovakia, which is Germanic people, as a concession so that he will keep quiet after that. But he was not going to keep quiet after that. He felt emboldened. He took the entire Czechoslovakia. Then finally, there was a treaty between Stalin's Molotov and Hitler's foreign minister Ribbentrop treaty, and that is how the Second World War unfolded. On the other hand, the French and British forces could have stood up to Hitler. And you know what happened later on when the German army attacked France? They went round the Maginot Line and French military collapsed I think very quickly. And the entire France was occupied by German forces. That is how the Second World War unfolded. So we can see many interesting things in history. Now Krishna never made those mistakes. So not making mistakes sometimes can be interpreted as being too tough or being unjust. No. Krishna, that's why Krishna makes those statements in the Gita. He tells Arjuna, by running away from a tough situation and then interpreting that as spirituality is absolutely gibberish. I can again quote from Mahabharata. That is a Gita. Krishna says, I tell you the context. Arjuna is telling Krishna, I would rather be a beggar. Nihatya dhata rashtrana ka predisya janardana pabam vivase dasman hattuidan ki atatayana guruna hattva ki mahanubhavan srayo bhoktum bhaiksham api khaloge. Bhaiksham means the food that you get by begging. Well, half the kingdom belongs to Pandavas. They were warriors. And Arjuna says, I would rather become a beggar and subsist by begging instead of fighting for my rights. So here, Arjuna is talking like a Gandhi. But Krishna was different. Krishna knew it was hypocrisy. It was timidity. Arjuna was trying to give a spiritual justification for his own timidity and imbecility. And Krishna uses some strong language also, calls him, he calls him hypocrite, in a way. So what do you mean to say? So even Arjuna tries to justify his timidity and his eagerness to run away from an unpleasant responsibility and trying to give a spiritual justification. I would rather be bhaikshyam api khaloki. Bhaikshyam means the food that you get by begging. I would rather be a beggar than fighting for my rights. But remember, if a great man of renunciation had talked like that, maybe Krishna would have congratulated him. Gandhiji was a great man of renunciation. But Arjuna was not Gandhi. Arjuna was a warrior. Suddenly, because of fear, he says, I would rather be a beggar. Krishna could see through the game. That's why Swami Vivekananda said Krishna had no cap having his brain. Krishna scolded Arjuna. You are an average human being, you are a soldier. And you are fighting for your rights. And you say because you are afraid of fighting Bhishma and Drona, his own masters. So, but he wanted to hide his fear and his humility, his imbecility. So Krishna says, no, that won't work. If you run away from an unpleasant responsibility, don't think you are solving a problem. You are increasing the problem. Krishna could see through that. Remember, that's why Krishna used stagecraft, tactics and strategy in the Mahabharata battle. Krishna had to use it. Otherwise, what will happen? People who humiliated Draupadi will be victorious. Like Hitler becoming victorious in the Second World War. You can imagine what will happen in the world. Or even the great tacticians like Marshal Sukkot, Marshal Koenig, or Montgomery, or Eisenhower, the great military supreme commanders of Allied forces. They had to use their own tactics and strategy to become victorious in the Second World War. So Krishna was a statesman, he was a warrior, he was a general, he was a saint, he was a philosopher. Humble philosopher, saint to helpless people, but absolutely uncompromising enemy towards evil. These two combined for what? Preserving Dharma. Follow? Like Bobby said, the human impulse to see a good, strong man, maybe a somewhat rough-looking person, emerging to put in a sense of order and justice in a wild society. You talked about, I think, that human impulse is always found in the Mahabharata settings, in different places. That's why Mahabharata Vyasa created this character who was completely all round, without any scope for doubt or weakness or imbecility or confusion or conflicts.
Yeah, brilliant. Maharaj, there are 4 more questions. There's some sound bleeding through. I'm going to ignore that. I called on Owner earlier, and I don't see the hand up anymore, so I'll read the question on the same subject. My question, which has intrigued me, which is why the ideal characters like Bhishma and Drona sided with the Kauravas in Kurukshetra. An explanation which impressed me most was by the eminent astrophysicist Rajesh Kumar. He says it's because the heredity of the Pandavas is questionable as their births are shrouded in mystery. Bhishma and Drona were duty-bound to support the legitimate claimants, the Kauravas. What do you think about that?
Oh, that is absolutely an unjustified comment. You often find a tendency to become conspicuous by support, by saying something which is actually outrageous to say that Krishna, Bhishma and Drona were supporting Kauravas because they thought that Kauravas had greater justice on their side. Absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. You don't support a man like Dushasana humiliating the wife of another person in the Kaurava court, and then Duryodhana encouraging him, and the old man sitting and supporting. And by the way, I want to emphasize one point. Bhishma and Drona never supported Kauravas for that. Remember, they censured them, they scolded them. They were Vidura, Bhishma, Drona. They did not support or encourage Duryodhana and Dushasana in these evil, terrible things. Never. Bhishma was a great man. Drona was a great man. Vidura actively came and supported Pandavas. Please remember that. Never imagine that Bhishma and Drona. The only point that Bhishma said was because of the dependence on Duryodhana, their own mind was deluded. Their own mind was polluted. So if you stay if you stay depending upon an evil person for a very long time, taking help from him for all purposes, then naturally you will be emotionally, you become somewhat dependent upon that person out of gratitude. Well, Bhishma could have easily got out of that sense of obligation because of his renunciation alone. All the Kauravas and Pandavas got this kingdom because Bhishma renounced his own right he renounced his own right to marry. He took to the life of a hermit, and that is why, and that's how both the Kauravas and Pandavas eventually got the right to rule the kingdom. So it is totally wrong to assume that Kauravas had any more legitimate rights than Pandavas. That's absolutely wrong.
Well, the questioner has unmuted, so the dialogue is an option. Owner, do you want to speak?
Yeah. So okay.
No, I don't hear an answer.
Yeah.
I'll move on.
Yeah.
There's a very important question on the YouTube, and then I'll get to the raised hands if there's time. Are there any tips to those wanting to read along or listen to an audio book of the Mahabharata? Is there a specific approach or mindset to keep while absorbing the text? And what are the type of questions you would like from us?
Well, I have no idea if there is an audio book available because Mahabharata is a very huge literary classic, a giant of a book. So I don't think there is any audio dealing with the entire Mahabharata. There may be some lectures on Mahabharata in some Indian vernacular, but I am not aware of any such anything like that available in English language. Maybe most people have come to know about Mahabharata and Ramayana by watching this movie, I think. So that may give some idea, absolutely, but again, not the complete idea. So
Maharaj, which movie are you referring to?
I think Mahabharata Hindi, there is a movie in Hindi.
There's a Hindi version that with
I think so. With English I don't know. Maybe there could be an English subtitle. Somebody has already registered. I don't know. But I think there is something. Yeah.
I know the questioner by email, and I'm going to copy there is a 45-hour version on audiobook he has downloaded, and there's another link in the chat, which I'm going to screenshot.
Yeah.
So James, I'll send you that as well. It may be the same audiobook.
Yeah.
So for those who absorb their information that way.
Yeah.
And also, thank you, Shri. Gopi, can you unmute and pronounce that for us? C. Rajagopal.
Yeah, it's C. Rajagopalachari, who was a senior statesman in India.
Yeah.
He has a translation of the Mahabharata, which is in a paperback, and it's published by Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. It's in English, and it's a nice, short, readable version that gives the basic story.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I know there are quite a few books in English available, but I think they were asking about audio book. That I don't know. Hindi there may be available. Yeah, but Rajaji's book on Mahabharata and Ramayana, both you can find. He has written on both published by Vidya Bhavan, Ramayana and Mahabharata. This, okay.
Okay, thank you. And Ratan, I see you're listening also. I can send that out.
Yes.
There are, thank you both.
Thank you.
There are questions. One hand was lowered. He was first, I think, and then there's Sonia. David, if you still have a question, raise your hand. And meanwhile, I'll go to Sonia.
We almost close 7:27. 7:30, I think, 7:30.
Okay, Sonia, do you have a quick question?
Two more questions, just two more, just last two questions, yeah.
Yeah, these are the last two.
Yeah, please.
Sonia, are you still with us? Can you unmute, please?
Please.
Okay, no Sonia yet. David, are you still there with a question? No. I do see that there's a critical edition prepared by scholars at Bandakar Oriental Research.
Oh, yeah, that is Sanskrit. Yeah. Critical
I was
edition.
able to get unmuted if at the time slot.
Yes, go ahead, Sonia. Go ahead.
Please.
So Swamiji, I wanted to ask your guidance on something that has been on my mind for many years now. I am a mother of 3 kids. I'm a daughter, and I'm also an individual with my own life goals. I often feel very torn between these 3 responsibilities: caring for my children, supporting my aging parents, and then also honoring my own path and purpose. All of these 3 seem to conflict with each other. From a Dharma perspective, how should I understand my priorities? How can I balance these duties without feeling like I'm doing one and failing in another?
So I think you have 3 responsibilities. You cannot sacrifice one for the other. So you sincere attempt to do whatever you are supposed to do, and then not worrying, not becoming worried when you feel you are not able to do as much as you want to do. So in life there are 2 things. One, doing everything wonderfully well. Second, trying to do everything wonderfully well. Of course, making an attempt to do everything properly, that we can do without difficulty. Whether we are able to do it, everything to complete fruition, that's a different matter. That's a matter of interpretation. But when we face conflicts from our own mind, when our own mind asks question, what are you doing, how are you doing properly? These inner conflicts, Mahabharata himself answers this question. When we face inner conflicts, the only way we can solve the problem to face the conflict is try to do sincerely whatever we are supposed to do. And stop there. Don't go beyond that. Am I doing it successfully? Am I doing enough? That question we need not take seriously. Mind will ask you, are you doing it properly? No? Don't listen to the mind when mind asks those questions. But try to do our best. Our own attempt to do something properly, that itself is enough. This is not in business. I am talking about facing conflicts, remember. When you actually do a work, you have to do it completely, external work, writing or speaking or cooking or doing your office work, you have to do perfectly well. That's a different matter. But the question of facing inner conflicts, resolving conflicts, there's only one way. Do our best and then stop there, don't look beyond that. This is very important. Because in this world we can only try to do our best. We cannot 100% ensure success. It's a reality. In all undertakings, all that we can do at the most is to try to do our best and don't look beyond that. Again, am I really doing it? Mind will again try to taunt you, to torture you. This happens, inner conflicts. You need not look beyond that. You need not bargain beyond that. Do your best and stop there. Otherwise, there will be no peace of mind.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Sonia.
Yeah.
I texted to David in the chat to see, but he has dropped his hand. So I think that's it, Maharaj. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great first session.
Yeah. Today I was only trying to introduce Mahabharata, and I brought Ramayana because these two epics are equally important, and Ramayana is an earlier work, much earlier than Mahabharata. Mahabharata is a much later work. But still, there are many common scenes, conflicts and situations which are dealt with differently. Rama, his own approach was very idealistic, very regimental and very literary. He was very literal in his interpretation of Dharma. Krishna was more fluid, more situational, based on different context. Again, that's why Krishna's understanding and definition and practice of Dharma come closer to the actual meaning of Dharma. Dharma is something that preserves, sustains, protects, and makes sure that there is harmony in society. By practicing ahimsa, you cause so much of bloodshed in the world. Krishna was not for that. Krishna won't stick to this ideal of ahimsa and thereby cause so much of violence in the world. Rather, Krishna will try to remove a little bit of a problem so that there will be less violence in this world. In fact. So that's why. Thank you so much. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Maharaj. I'm looking forward to next week at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.